Hello and welcome to our NDIS information session on self-management. This session is part of the Understanding the NDIS series. My name is Lisa and I'm an Assistant Director with the Community Engagement Team at the NDIA. The material in today's information session is general in nature. Information provided in presentations by the National Disability Insurance Agency is considered to be true and correct at the time the presentation was presented or recorded. Changes in circumstances after the time of presentations or recordings may impact the accuracy of the information. Such material is assembled in good faith, but does not necessarily reflect the considered views of the National Disability Insurance Agency. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country on which we meet today. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and I would like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching today. Our accessibility features today include Auslan interpreters and live captions. Self-management is when you, your plan nominee, or child representative manage your NDIS funding. This means you have control over and responsibility for arranging and paying for the funded supports in your plan. In this presentation, we will cover what is self-management, when can't you self-manage, tips for self-managing well, directly engaging staff, and avoiding common mistakes. Self-management is when a participant, their plan nominee, or a child representative manages their NDIS funding. Participants can self-manage all or a part of their NDIS funding. Self-management enables a person to have direct control over NDIS funding and how it is spent, and have the flexibility to choose from a wide range of providers that will best meet their needs, including both registered and unregistered providers, and negotiate prices with those providers. Participants who self-manage are responsible for receiving their funding and arranging their NDIS supports, making agreements with providers about the supports they'll receive, including how and when the supports will be provided and paid for. This includes making accurate claims with all the required information within our time frame, then receiving funding and paying providers. Also, keeping records of invoices and receipts for a minimum of 5 years, and meeting their obligation as an employer if they choose to employ staff directly or use a contractor. Self-managers also need to cooperate with payment reviews. This is when a participant is asked to provide invoices, receipts, or other evidence to show the NDIA they've spent their funding on NDIS supports and in line with their NDIS plan. Participants who self-manage are responsible for buying their NDIS supports in line with any funding component amounts and funding periods in their plan. That means participants' funding can only be used to purchase the specific supports or groups of supports that are included in their plan. Also, managing their funding. So the cost of NDIS supports gives the participants value for money and can be met within their budget for the length of their plan. This means that the cost is reasonable when the participant thinks about the benefits that they'll get, and they can afford to pay for the support within their plan budget. Participants may need to pay back the amount of money spent on any supports they've purchased that weren't in their plan. Self-managers also need to advise us of any significant changes in their situation that may mean they can't meet their responsibilities as a self-manager. When can't a person self-manage? The NDIA will not allow a participant, their nominee or child representative to manage funding if they are bankrupt or insolvent, if they've been convicted of an offence that's been punishable by imprisonment for 2 years or more, or if it's involving fraud or dishonesty, or if self-management presents an unreasonable risk of harm to the participant, or if the person is unlikely to spend the funding on NDIS supports and in accordance with their plan. A participant, nominee, or child representative can't manage funding if they are unlikely to spend funds in line with the plan and only on NDIS supports. If they haven't spent in line with the plan in the past, we'll look at if it was a once-off or not, why funding was not spent appropriately, and if someone else was involved in that decision. A participant, nominee, or child representative can't manage funding if it would create an unreasonable risk of harm to the participant. We think about the risks of physical, mental, or financial harm and exploitation or undue influence. We also think about what safeguards could be used to minimise the risk. Risks are only unreasonable if we consider there to be no suitable safeguards or supports available to manage the risk to a participant. We don't look at a participant's impairment, but we do consider capacity to manage funds. If a participant would like to self-manage, but there are risks involved, we'll work with them to identify ways to minimise the risk of harm or help them spend their funding on only NDIS supports and in line with their plan. There might be supports or strategies we can include in their NDIS plan or that were included in previous plans that help reduce the risk. For example, we could fund supports in the plan to help the participant build skills and their confidence to self-manage. We could approve self-managing a smaller part of their NDIS funding when they start out. For example, the consumables budget. We can vary the length of the funding periods in their plan to reduce the amount of funding they can access at one time or we can give them a shorter plan. We can also schedule regular check-ins with the participant. Help from the participants' informal supports might also minimise the risk of harm. If we think there is an unreasonable risk to a participant, or if it's unlikely their funding will be spent on only NDIS supports and in line with their plan, we'll talk to them about other options for managing their plan funding. And the participant can still work towards safely self-managing their plan in the future if they want to. Self-managing a plan well. Self-managing well means looking for supports that offer the best value for money and are good quality. Learning about which types of supports, such as assistive technology, work best, and managing money and keeping good records. It also means understanding the NDIS plan so that a person can spend their funding on NDIS supports and in line with what's in their plan. Making sure plan funding lasts the length of the plan and the length of any funding periods within the plan, and having access to and using a computer or smartphone to make claims in the portal or the app. We'll ask a participant, their plan nominee or child representative, how they would like to manage plan funding during the plan meeting. They can ask to change how funding is managed at any time. There is no limit to how often they can make this request. They can request to self-manage part of their plan while they build capacity and confidence. And family, friends, or peer support networks can help. Funding may also be included in a plan for some types of paid supports to build this capacity. You can find out more in our booklet called A Guide to Self-Management. This is available on the NDIS website. If you self-manage your funding, you can generally use any provider. However, there are some supports that participants must use an NDIS registered providers for. These include specialist disability accommodation, behaviour supports, and supports where the use of a restrictive practice occurs or is likely to occur. Sometimes we might also say in a participant's plan which provider they need to use. This is generally only when quotes have been received for certain supports. A registered provider meets the NDIS quality and safeguard standards, and workers with registered providers also undergo an NDIS worker screening check. Participants can contact the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission to check for registered providers. If a participant chooses a provider that isn't registered, they will need to make sure that the provider has the right qualifications, training, and safety checks. Participants can ask providers, employees, or contractors, providing them with supports, to do an NDIS worker screening check. And the NDIA can consider changing a participant's plan management type if a person is unlikely to meet these requirements. Self-managers can make a claim by using the My NDIS portal, the My NDIS app, or a manual self-management claim form. It's important to make sure that claims are complete and accurate, and there are invoices and records to support each claim. Once a claim is submitted, it usually takes 2 business days to be paid. As a self-manager, there are 2 different ways to pay for NDIS supports with NDIS funding. The image on screen outlines these. I'll start with the first example, which is that you make a claim and then pay for your supports. After a participant receives an invoice or a timesheet from their provider or staff, they can make a claim. The quickest and easiest way to do this is online, using the portal or through the My NDIS app. Money from their planned budget will be paid into their nominated bank account, and once received, they can then pay their provider's invoice. Our second example is when you pay for supports upfront and then you make a claim. In this example, after a participant receives their supports, they pay their provider or employee using their own money, and they get a receipt. Participants then make a claim to have the money from their NDIS planned budget paid into their nominated bank account. Reimbursements usually occur within 2 business days. An important note, participants cannot make a claim before they receive support. For example, if they're due to attend a physiotherapy appointment tomorrow, they cannot claim the support today as it's not yet been delivered. A worker screening check is a process that is managed by the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission to check that a worker is safe for participants to use. Workers from registered providers should already have worker screening checks, and self-managers can ask providers, employees or contractors providing them with supports and services to do an NDIS worker screening check. These are available in each state and territory, and self-managers can also request access to a national database to check if their providers, contractors or staff have completed the worker screening check. You can learn more about the NDIS worker screening checks and request access to the national database on the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission website. Making service agreements. Self-managers are responsible for paying providers on time and meeting their agreed responsibilities with them. And providers are responsible for providing what has been agreed. Participants are encouraged to have a service agreement in place with each of their providers. The agreement should outline what supports will be provided to the participant and how and when the supports will be provided and paid for. A provider may have their own standard service agreement, or a person can create their own. A service agreement is between a person and their provider and is a contract under Australian consumer law. If a participant has issues with providers, they can visit the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission website or the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission website for assistance. You can learn more about creating service agreements on the NDIS website. And if a participant hires a contractor or if they employ their own staff, they will likely have a contract or employment conditions and agreements in place. In this situation, they may not need a service agreement. Self-managers must keep good records to show how they have spent their NDIS funds. Record types include payroll summaries and payslips, the service agreements, invoices and receipts, and bank statements. Records should include the provider's name and their Australian business number, or ABN. It should also include the support start and end date and time, a short description of the support, the amount of support that was provided, and this can be in hours or quantity depending on the support or service. The record should also include the support price per hour or per unit and the total amount that has been paid. If a self-manager employs their own staff, they must keep up-to-date payroll records with the dates and hours their staff work and the amount that they pay them. They will also need to keep records of tax, superannuation, and insurance payments. Directly engaging staff. Self-managers can buy NDIS supports from registered, unregistered businesses and organisations. The businesses and organisations will generally arrange supports and take responsibility for support workers. Items can also be purchased from businesses in a shop or online. And a self-employed contractor is a person with an Australian business number, or ABN, who is responsible for managing their own business. Self-employed contractors may or may not be registered NDIS providers. And a person can choose to recruit, employ, and manage the people who support them. The Australian Taxation Office website has some useful resources to help you learn more about employees and contractors. When someone directly employs their own staff, they become an employer. Employers have legal and regulatory responsibilities, including making sure staff have the right skills, qualifications, training and safety checks, paying for costs like recruitment, wages, superannuation and insurance. Also providing a safe place for them to work and to seek professional advice when needed from an accountant, a financial advisor, or an employment agency. Avoiding mistakes. Non-compliance can range from a simple mistake to committing a crime like fraud. Error or mistake is when a person does the wrong thing without meaning to and without hoping to gain something for themselves. Misuse is when a person uses NDIS funds in ways that are not in line with the participant's plan or the law. A conflict of interest is when a person or an organisation has an opportunity to put what will benefit them ahead of the interests of the people that they support. And dishonest behaviour is when someone uses NDIS funds when they know it's the wrong thing to do. When someone behaves dishonestly, they are taking advantage of participants, their families and carers. It is important self-managers make sure their claims are complete and accurate, and they have the right invoices and records to match their requests. To make sure claims are right, self-managers should check that they have entered the correct start and end date for the support that they're claiming, that the payment amount they enter in the portal or app matches the amount on the invoice or receipt, that they are making the claim against the right support category and that this category is self-managed. They have enough funds in the relevant funding component amount for the current funding period to purchase the support, and that they have enough funds in their plan for the claim. Now, we know self-managers try to do the right thing, but sometimes make mistakes. We can work with self-managers to avoid mistakes. For example, we might add funding to a plan for supports that will help participants build the capacity to self-manage. We could approve self-management of a smaller part of their funding. For example, the consumables budget. We can also vary the length of funding periods in a plan to give them a shorter period to manage. And we can also schedule regular check-ins. And if a self-manager does make a mistake, they can cancel a claim in the portal or app. They can call us, or they can submit a payment inquiry in the portal. The NDIA reviews claims to make sure funds are spent appropriately. When we review a claim, we'll talk to participants and nominees about why we are reviewing their payments and what information we need, and also how they can provide that information to us. If there's no valid evidence or records to support a claim, we may cancel outstanding payments or raise a debt that the participant will need to pay back. Resources and links. We have many resources that are available on our website to help you learn about and self-manage your plan. There are also a lot of other resources available outside of the NDIS. These are linked on screen. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you for taking the time to watch our presentation on self-managing an NDIS plan.